This is the Teachable Soul podcast. Because we cannot possibly live long enough to make all the mistakes ourselves, let's take a few moments to learn from the mistakes of others. The Teachable Soul podcast, where guests and listeners like you share stories of failure and teachable moments on the journey to success. Here's your host, Kat Daniels.
Welcome to the Teachable Soul podcast. I am your host, Kat Daniels, and today with me, I have the honor of interviewing Mr. Drexel Deal. He is the author of The Fight of My Life is Wrapped Up in My Father. He is an ex-gang member of one of the most notorious street gangs in the Bahamas at the time, known as the Rebellion Raiders. He is an author, motivational speaker, a former Toastmaster of the Year and Speaker of the Year. He has also served as president of the Disabled Persons Organization, which is geared toward the empowerment of persons with disabilities. In 2004, he spearheaded the largest training initiative ever done in the Bahamas to train some 21 persons with disabilities in 2 phases of computers. In August of 2006, Drexel was recognized as a high achiever in the College of the Bahamas President's Scholars Report for his studies in effective writing and human resource management. Welcome, Drexel. Thank you for meeting with me today.
Oh, the pleasure is mine.
Oh, well, I am so glad that we were able to talk. So just a little bit for our listeners, I stumbled upon Drexel's book because he wrote a quote that I use often throughout the podcast about how storytelling kind of gives us a platform basically to learn from other people's mistakes. And he also wrote the book about how some of the mistakes that he had made throughout his life or choices that he had decided on was kind of wrapped up in some of the things that had happened in his life, including with his parents. So I honestly have not read the entire book, but it is an incredible book thus far and is filled, I love every second of it, and it's filled with just so many stories. So do you want to kind of give us a brief overview of either you can start with your life or you can start with how you decided to write this book?
Okay. So actually, about the book itself, as you know, I was a part of the gang. I lost my sight in July 5th of 1996, attempting to rob an armored vehicle. I was shot 4 times and almost lost my life. And as a matter of fact, the doctors, they deemed it a miracle that I even survived, particularly the shot to my head. It was truly severe. And so through the recuperating process, basically, I begin to, when you lose your sight, you begin to reflect. And I've seen it a lot in reading books and even communicating with individuals. It's like some individuals, after they would have gotten sentenced to 15 or 25 years, during that time, they begin to reflect and they begin to think, where did they go wrong? And so I did that same process. I'm totally blind. And I begin to think and ask myself, where did I went wrong? And so in that process, I began to, do a lot of interviews because I was not interested in learning why did I went wrong, but why did so many thousands of young men in the Bahamas in the early 90s, and it was not just an epidemic that was going on here in the Bahamas, but it was going on throughout the Western world, United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and the rest of those places. And I began, a common theme keep coming up, the absentee of fathers in that regard. And so there's Richard Carlson, the guy who wrote, he's not the late Richard Carlson, Dr. Richard Carlson. He wrote Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. But in one of his books I read, he said, the best way to understand something of value is to study its absence. And so I begin to study the absence of absentee father and the negative effect of it. And it really devastated, I believe the Bahamas was voice hit. And we get a saying here in the Bahamas, when the United States sneeze, it's us in the Bahamas who really catches the cold. And so I began to look at our makeup, and ironically, I was born in 1975. In 1976, something rather unique happened in the Bahamas for the first time since we were recording births. And it was the first year in the Bahamas that births outside of marriages surpassed those born into marriages. And some 15, 16 years later, we had a gang problem. And 90% of those individuals who made up the gangs were those us same individuals who were born in the year of 1975, 76, and 77, and upward in that regard. And so it showed a real correlation. When the breakdown of the home begins in any particular nation, then you will have this gang problem thereabouts that will always show its ugly head. And when you look at it, all it is young men trying to find some way of bonding, some way of connecting. They're trying to find a family thereabouts. And so that's what the book is basically all about. It documents the birth of the largest gang ever in the history of the Bahamas, how did that gang came about. But at the same time, it talks about my own personal experience and the experience of others. Like one individual wrote me in the prison. He said, when I read your book, I started to cry because as you were telling your life story, you were also telling my life story as well.
Mm. Wow.
So that is, if I could say it, is in a nutshell what the book is all about thereabouts.
Yeah. So just to clarify, there was not prior to when basically you and all of your peers had entered into the gang, there was not as bad of a gang problem in the Bahamas. Is that correct?
No, it was not so much a gang problem in the Bahamas. I mean, different communities have always had like different rivalries, and it was mainly fist fights, and sometimes as a result of basketball tournaments and so forth thereabouts, or issues that used to happen during what we call our national festival, which is Chankanu. Different areas was supporting different groups, and it often, depending if your group lose, it normally lead to some cheering and some angry from fist fight. But that was basically it. But when you talk about, like I said, we get a lot of our influence from the United States, from the way we talk, from our rap music. One time ago, reggae music used to be a real popular thing down here in the Bahamas, but rap music has more or less taken over thereabouts, to the way we dress thereabouts. And so when you talk about movies, also we watch a lot of Western movies in times that come from the United States, Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, South Central and stuff like that basically. And so those things had an effect on us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see. Okay. And yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, in the United States as well, people talk about well, I guess they used to talk about like music and the industry and things like that were affecting, but now they're saying that social media has that same effect, and they're putting more of a closer eye or closer watch on social media and having effects like that, and kind of using basically their powers for good or evil type thing is to look at it. Because I mean, it does have its influence no matter what. You know, and especially when you're a kid and when you're a teenager, you're building all of your belief systems off of the things that influence you during that time, because you don't really have yet a sense of, or a huge sense of self. I mean, if you do, you're very fortunate, and you're definitely not in the majority at that point. I assume had begun to write this book after you became blind, correct?
Yes, I wrote the book after I would have lost my sight.
Okay, and I love also that you helped train other people with disabilities for computers. How did you do that?
Actually, I stumbled across, before I wrote my book, I realized it was incumbent upon me to take up training if I'm looking to seek gainful employment. And one of the things I was not good at was the computer. And so I was looking for something to do from class to take up for myself. And then taking up the class, I got into communication with the owner of the class. And he said, listen, you're just interested in this for yourself. I understand and I appreciate it. But I'm quite certain if you're interested as a person with disability, there are others out there who are also interested as well. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I just happened to be the president of the Disabled Persons Organization. So he came and he did a presentation to our organization, and 80% of the members signed up. We went out there and raised the funds, and next thing you know, it was history thereabouts. And so that's how I got into the training, basically. Even though I initially sought the training for myself, But after the training began, I was the one who didn't take much part of the training because I had to now go there and raise the funds, basically in that regard. But nonetheless, I stick with it, and I'm pretty proficient now on using my computer thereabouts.
That's fantastic. So how did you write the book, and how do you use the computer? Do you have different tools that you have to use because you're actually blind?
Yeah, there's a software that a lot of persons in the Bahamas, not just here in the Bahamas, but it's widely used. It's called JAWS, Java Active Systems for Word. And what it does, it's actually a screen reader. And so whatever is on the screen, it let us know. And so whenever I type a key, if I'm typing something or a document, it let me know what letter I'm pressing, that I'm touching. Basically, you get used to it and you're able to type faster. Thereabouts, I'm able to surf the internet. I don't do Facebook that well on it. There are other persons who do extremely well with it. And so it allows me, like I said, to type whatever I need to type. And the interview at first, because when I first started doing the interviews, it was a 10-year process. I didn't know how to use a computer then. Thereabouts. So I recorded the interviews, and then I kept those recordings. And after I became proficient with computers, I began to type out the interviews, and also with the assistance of my wife. She helped me type out the interviews, and thereabouts, and we began to put them to use as was needed thereabouts.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I would never have even known that was a thing. So you also speak as well, and you've won multiple awards doing that. Do you travel to speak, or is that in the Bahamas mostly so far?
Yeah, it's basically in the Bahamas. The Bahamas is something like 16 main inhabited islands, and they say we have 700 different islands. There are 16 inhabited main islands that I have traveled to, basically, but there's 32 inhabited islands throughout the Bahamas, and 16 of them have schools thereabouts. So I've traveled to basically just about every family island in the Bahamas, where I address where the churches or as well as school assemblies. And I use the mistakes of my past. There's a scripture verse I've come to love and appreciate. It's taken from Proverbs chapter 25, verse 12, that says, and I'm quoting from the Good News translation of the Bible, it says, a warning given by an experienced person to someone willing to listen, it's more valuable than gold rings and jewelry made of the finest gold. And so I take the negative, I take my bad experience, and I use it as an example to help kids to appreciate, rather than tell them what can happen, I show them what will happen as using my blindness as that warning example thereabouts. And it's pretty effective. I've gotten a lot of positive reviews, and not just from the students, but also the teachers. I had a presentation on yesterday in connection with our Ministry of Social Services and their parenting program on the topic Fathers Make a Difference.
That's fantastic. Yeah, my parents were divorced, and my father was always tried to be involved. But I mean, even if you have an involved father, I have found that, I mean, there can still be just unknowns and mistakes. Parenting is hard. It doesn't.
Oh, yes, it is.
Present or not, it's just hard. There's no manual, and everybody, every kid and every parent and every person is just so different. And there's no manual to fixing people or figuring people out even, so it can be very difficult. I am a huge proponent of like co-parenting classes and parenting classes in general for anybody, all the time. So yeah, that's fantastic that you're doing that as well. So I know that you were shot and you became blind, and you were obviously doing a lot of self-reflecting during that time. What was kind of the thought process that led you to understanding that a lot of the issues that you personally had were wrapped up in the absence of your father?
When you look at it, as I begin to write, and that's when it all became clear. I mean, reflecting is one thing, but when you begin to write and begin to put it on paper, and you begin to realize, and a lot of things begin to come up thereabouts. To think about it, At the age of 5, I mean, I thought I had the best family life there was. I had a father who was there, a mother who kept the home running, and then one day, out of the blue, our father, he decided that he's going to move on. And so he left my mother. I'm the oldest of 3. I have 2 younger sisters, and so my mother was 21 years of age, uneducated, and thereabouts. And my last sister, she was just 2 or 3 weeks old. And so he left her, and she had to hurry go there and get a job as a waitress. And so only so much that you can earn as a waitress. And things was rough. But shortly thereafter, leaving, he came back. And he came back not because he wanted to resume the relationship that he had left, but he came back now wanting to have my mother as a side relationship thereabouts. And so she put her foot down, and I guess he didn't like it. I could only surmise, but I don't know what he was thinking. I guess he said to himself, well, if I can't have you, no one else is going to have you. So my mother, she tells the story that she was awakened around 2, 3 o'clock in the morning because my little sister was crying, and for the likes of her, she couldn't understand why the little girl was crying. Goes out, makes her buttermilk, only to discover the place was on fire. She got us out, and the neighbors were able to come put the fire out. My father, I guess he saw that didn't work. He came back 2 weeks later and poured oil paint over everything that we own as a family. And it was at that particular point that my life changed. You're talking about a happy, fun, loving, happy child who just went quiet and reserved. You're talking about a child who once had a love for education, who lost all interest in learning, so much so my teacher pulled my mother aside and asked her what's going on with Drexel. He doesn't talk, doesn't do his homework, what's going on? And so by the time as I was a teenager, I was not only reserved and quiet, but now I was angry. And not just angry because my father walked out, but angry also too because some things that my mother was doing. And as single mothers, they have to be truly, especially when they're dealing with young children thereabouts, they got to be careful who they allow in their children's life.
Right.
It cannot be a revolving door, and so forth. And so it messes particularly with young boys. Mm-hmm. When every 6 months or every year there's a new stepfather, there's a new stepdaddy. Mm-hmm. Thereabouts. And so I became angry. At one point we were living, my mother was living with a particular individual, even though him and I were not close thereabouts, but he was the best stepfather we ever had, and at the same time she is seeing somebody else. And mm-hmm. the person she's seeing is working at her, working with her on the same premises, and then I'm working there part-time in the evening, and I know what's going on. Everyone on the job knows what's going on, and it's was an embarrassing ordeal. And so you talk about grade 8 and grade 9, I was extremely angry.
Right.
And all the anger that I was holding up, not just from my father, but what my mother was doing, and in grade 11, it just exploded. Yeah. And it exploded in school with fight after fight, and eventually being kicked out of school. After that, joining up with a gang with a lot of other hurting young men, and everything that's went from bad to worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally have had to, in adulthood, separate and realize that there is a separate, we always want to think of our mom as this perfect person, mm-hmm. Who can do no wrong, but mm-hmm. even have had to realize that there is a difference between the person that my mom is and the human being that she is, even because she is a human being and she has trauma, and she has pain, and she has emotions, and she has anger just like any of us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that trauma and that anger can take over who you are and who you become, versus who you may want to be, even. Mm-hmm. And can sometimes cause us to make mistakes like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's I hope eventually that we can all learn that we should separate the role of the person that we believe they should be from the person that they are, and realize that they're human and can make mistakes as well. And another thing that you said was that, you were angry. Do you think that your dad may have been dealing with some anger issues as well, like that maybe he was, from his home life or anything?
I cannot say. I don't know much about my father's home. Now, keep this in mind now. The last name that I carry is a Deal. Normally here in the Bahamas, basically, Deals, when you hear the last name Deal, it's normally associated with someone of a lighter skin color. I'm a typical black African American male, and so he is not Deal is not my biological father. And so the individual whom I grew up believing it was my father, at the age of 7, he sat me down and let me know that he's not my father, but he will love me as if I'm still his biological son. I didn't meet my biological father not until the age of probably 15, heading into grade 11, thereabouts, and it was just met him 3 times basically. And so I wasn't close with neither one. One walked out on me, who I thought was my biological father, or whom I still to this day refer to as my father. And my biological father didn't meet him not until I was in grade, I guess, at 11. And there was never no connection, no bond ever developed there.
Oh, wow. So did you ever confront your mom? Because you said that it was the person that you believed to be your father who's the one who told you this. Did your mom told you?
Yeah, after he told me, 2 weeks later, my mother sat me down to have the same conversation. I told her that, I don't had this conversation with Fred Deal. He already told me that he was not my biological father, basically, thereabouts. And so apparently he met my mother when she was 2 months pregnant, thereabouts. And he decided that he was, even though she was 2 months pregnant, he was going to raise me as his own. But that only lasts until their relationship lasts, because after the relationship is over, he moved on with his life, and that was it.
Oh, I see. Did he ever know that you existed?
Yeah, my biological father, yes, he found that I had existed, basically, in that regard. But he had some issues going on with himself as well. And ironically, but 2 years ago, he reached out to me. He made an attempt to find me, and we talked. I met him personally, and then after that, 2 months later, he died.
Oh, wow. Did he because he knew he was sick or something?
Was it fate or not? I don't know. Maybe he knew he was about to die. I don't know. Thereabouts, and so it was just ironic, basically. And you're talking about almost after a 40-year period, he can decide to reach out. Not 40-year, but 30-year period, he decided to reach out to me, and then 2 months later, he died.
Right. So were you able to resolve anything with him within yourself? Did you have any, I don't know if you felt any emotions towards him about, you mentioned that he was having some things going on during within his life as well during the time that you were born. Did you ever resent or were you ever upset that he wasn't around personally?
No, I never vented because I guess it came to a point where I just let it go.
Yeah.
And in writing, one of the things I love about writing, it's difficult to hold on to anything when you've already poured out onto a page. So when you impose your hurt and your feelings, your emotions onto a page or onto something, it's difficult now to take the back off the page and put that still in your heart and hold some sort of resentment. I've let it go, and so what I've decided to do is focus on how best I can be a better father to my son. Thereabouts, and so learning from his mistakes made me more consciously aware of the things that I need to do to make sure that my son will grow up to be a well-adjusted and balanced citizen and able to contribute to the well-being of the Bahamas.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I am so glad that you were able to turn your life around and do that. You're really doing some really wonderful things. And I agree with what you're talking about with writing. That's when I can't go to sleep, I keep a notebook by my bed. And when I can't go to sleep, I'll write it out. Or if it's my phone or something, I'll type it out so that I can get it out of my head and remember it for tomorrow. Because I'm always terrified I'm going to forget something is my thing. So, but yeah, I completely agree. Once it's out of you and on paper, then it's pretty much out. But he contacted you. Did you, I assume you guys spoke and had a good conversation, right?
Yes, we spoke and we had a conversation thereabouts, but it wasn't as if it was, I guess, I don't know what to say. I guess it's difficult to say, well, it was some sort of burden that was taken off of my shoulder. It was just a glimpse into a side of an individual, basically, whom I had some connection with and just never knew. And even at the funeral, I met some other siblings, sisters and brothers, and I mean, he seemed to be more closer with them because he was married, and they hear them crying. I'm sitting there, and I'm feeling nothing, and I'm saying to myself, I would never want to put a child through this, whereby I'm deceased, and my child is there, and there's no sort of emotion, no connection, no sense of lost, so to speak, in that regard.
Yeah, and you probably felt kind of uncomfortable even probably being there, right?
Yeah, it was difficult, particularly hearing your siblings around you whom you just meet. They are bawling their hearts out, crying, and you just feeling nothing.
Right. Yeah, and trying to comfort them. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever he reached out to you, do you know if he ever resolved anything within himself, or if he felt any remorse for anything? Like, is that why he reached out, I presume?
I cannot honestly say,
No.
but I met his wife, and she would always say to me that he would always speak about me, even though both him and I were not that close and didn't communicate for years, thereabout, and so forth. And even though I don't carry his last name, but she often said that he would speak about me thereabouts. But the thing that I've come to appreciate in life, I mean, it's cowardice to walk away from a child.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't walk away from a child, and I guess parents have to also realize this, because even the parenting class I often will lend my assistance to. Sometimes you have two individuals and the relationship is over, and I mean there's that raw anger and animosity. It's not, you two didn't work out no longer, so it's not about you two. You now have a child into this world now, that you have to now put aside your personal differences and come together and see what's in the best interest for the child. Because both of you have to be involved. Both of you have to be there. Both of you have to now begin to see what can we do to make sure that this child, because I mean, sometimes we tend to focus on all the petty little hurts and embarrassment, but the person who's hurting the most is the child.
Right.
While we're bickering and fighting, the child is the one who's hurting the most, because the child, he's taking or she is taking it personal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because they feel as if they've been abandoned.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they feel as if somehow it's they are at fault.
Yeah.
Thereabouts.
Yeah. Well, and even if I mean, like I said, my parents grew up divorced, and I never really felt like their divorce was my fault. But there were multiple times where they were arguing with each other just about me. And I never felt like it was my fault. I understood, I was lucky in that aspect. I understood that it wasn't my fault, but I never wanted to have to choose between them. Multiple times growing up where I felt like I was having or I was being put in a position where I was supposed to be choosing between my mother and father. And of course, as a kid, your whole devotion in life is to your parents, both of them. And, they're the most important people in your life because they're pretty much all you've got, like from birth. I wish that I could be more involved with parenting classes like that and just tell people, the after effects of what, even just arguing so much in front of your kids can do to them, because it's definitely something that's extremely important.
Yes, I'm what you're saying, because I know for me, because when I was growing up, at the age of 9, between the ages of 9 and 12, it felt as if I was an unwanted child. What do I mean by that? It felt as if I was unloved. My mother, she was not an emotional person who give you hugs and kisses and so forth. And then on top of that, when my father left, he never used to assist financially thereabouts. And so therefore she had to take on 2 and 3 jobs. And so it's never that. And I felt as if that connection, that bond that should exist between a mother and her son, that was never there. And my father was not around. And there was a song, the Beatles sang it in the early 60s. and a Bahamian artist also sang it in 1975, and it's entitled "I'm Nobody's Child." And the lyrics goes, "Like a flower, I'm growing wild. No mommy kisses and no daddy smile. Nobody wants me. I'm nobody's child." And so that used to be my theme song. And then you feel as if you're unwanted, unloved, and then it leads to you making some poor and horrible decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely does.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit about your time when you were with the gang members? Because you mentioned that you were kind of with other people who were also, it seems like they were all kind of seeking a community or some kind of support, essentially, like at the root of everything. So is that what you think was happening there?
Yeah, because when you look at it, 90% of the individuals who were part of the gangs were normally individuals from single-parent homes. And then even those who were there who had both parents involved, yes, the father might have been there, but he might not have been involved. And I've come to appreciate in life, you don't have to be absent out of the home in order to be considered an absentee father. You can be home and yet still absent in the life or in the life of your child thereabouts. So, but here's a particular take. I had an opportunity to interview, like I said, I was not just interested in learning, but writing about what I did. I was interested in learning why did so many of us went wrong. And in order to do so, I interviewed individuals who I was once rival with, gang leaders, drug dealers, former death row inmate, and one of them who was the founding member of the gang that I joined, he said something to me that was rather interesting. And he said to me, from time to time, another gang member's sister, because they're now all out of the gang. Mm-hmm. Another gang member's sister would see him and say, like, why don't you go visit Junior? Junior that stays in the house all day and doesn't come out. And so he said one day he was off, he went there and he picked up Junior, and they were riding around for a while. They went on East Street. East Street was the area that the gang, where the nest was, so to speak, its headquarters. And he said when they went on East Street, and they was hanging there for a while, the guy he picked up, Junior, just broke down and started crying. Just started crying. And he had to take him home. And he said, no certain deal, I just feel it too when I go to East Street. Because even though we were doing foolishness, it was a family. Love was there. And that's what these, and just hanging out, and see, males bond differently, males connect differently. A female, they could sit down and chat, and they're connecting. Males do it more differently, and they could sit down together, and no one could be saying nothing, and that they bonding. Playing sports together, when they go to parties, and someone gets in the fight, and someone coming into someone's defense, that's a matter of connecting or bonding in that regard. And so these individuals, idle hands and thereabouts, end up getting, because there was no constructive guidance, no true male leadership that could have directed them. They got into mischief that they would not normally got into if there was an involved father or an involved uncle around thereabouts.
Absolutely. Well, and you mentioned too that you can still be an absent father and be there, like physically in the home. And I think that that's important to stress as well, because I know so many men who are raised to believe that they're supposed to go out of the home and work and provide, money or provide this life for their family. But then they come home and they're so tired from working, 60-hour weeks that they don't have any time left over to spend or any energy left over to give to their family or their kids. And I think that that's, a whole nother epidemic that, is affecting men specifically. Men are brought up to not show very many emotions in general, except for maybe anger, is really the only acceptable emotion that so many people are brought up to believe is okay for guys.
Yeah, what you were saying is quite right. Some years ago, after I lost my sight, I attempted to deduct the case because I was blind. They caught me red-handed. I knew there was no way in the world I was been able to win that case. And during the process when I was hiding, one of my aunts took me in, and she has a 4-bedroom house, and I was hiding in a room that was directly opposite her master bedroom where her and her husband used to sleep. Now, keep this in mind. And so for the 3 months that I was there, her husband never knew. And so he would go to work, come home, and he would take off his police uniform. He was a police officer, and he never knew that I was there. It was not as if he used to come home late after work or go partying. Each time he come home from work, he changes his uniform, he goes out, and he sits across the street, him and 3 buddies, and they get a cold bear in their hand, and he's looking at and seeing what needs to be done in the yard. But he's more concerned on what's going on the outside, that he had no clue in terms of what was going on the inside. And so vice versa, as you indicated, you don't have to be absent in order to be an absentee father. You can be there and still totally absent because you're unaware, you're uninvolved in terms of what's going on under your very nose.
Yeah. That's insane that he never knew you were there.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned a little bit about, I mean, I know nobody wants to like speak poorly on their mother or anything. And I know that there are lots of other factors as well. Like, for instance, she was obviously a single mother and had to work multiple jobs during that time. But are there any things that you've spoken with your mother about after the fact and gained insight on something did?
What I've come to appreciate in life, you have to be honest. I mean, my mother doesn't like the conversation. My sister and I, basically, we could look at the situation candidly. And then some people, they make mistakes and they don't believe it, own up to it, thereabouts. And so it's never a pleasant conversation with my mother. As a matter of fact, she hates the book thereabout. But I've come to appreciate, and this is even when I'm speaking with young people, I keep it real and I keep it honest. If I made a mistake, my whole interest in sharing that mistake with you is for one purpose, so that you can learn from my mistake.
Right.
Thereabout. Case in point, we immunize our children, and all the immunization is it introduces a small portion of the virus to a child's immune system, so that child's immune system can develop a defense of when they happen to run across that virus again. By sharing our stories and sharing our mistakes with our children, being candid about it, being open about it, it gives them an opportunity whereby they can now learn from the mistakes from us, and thus be wiser than we were when we were at their age. But if you're ashamed to own up to your mistakes, then what you're doing, you're depriving your children of crucial life lesson that you would have learned the hard way because you don't want to share it with your children. You don't want your children to see you in a particular light. What you're doing is setting your child up to walk blindly into that same situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we can get over our silly mistakes and get over our little ego and realize, it's for the best interest of our children, because truth be told, who wants to expose their children and to pre-expose their children to measles? But we know it's for their best interest that they develop their body and develop an immune system towards it, and vice versa. By sharing stories with our children, our mistakes and mistakes of our other individuals, they themselves begin to think and they begin to make vows to themselves, thereby they would, like case in point, my father used to hit my mother. I was young. And my mother, she would talk about it basically, and from time to time, when she talked about it, it used to make me feel bad because she used to say only my younger sister Vanessa used to get up and tell my father, "Don't hit her." Now I'm a year and a half older than Vanessa. I just stand in and just I guess I was shocked. But each time she shared it with me, and I made up in my mind from a young age that one thing I would never do, I would never raise my hand to hit a woman. And I've been in relationships where females got in my face, and I told them point blank, if you hit me, the relationship is over. And this is before I lost my sight. This is when I was on the streets, in the gang, and deeply involved in the gang, and had some sort of, I was a general, so to speak, in the gang. But even though I was living a violent life on the streets, I would refuse to bring violence into any relationship that I was in. And it was all because of a vow that I made when I was at a young age, after hearing my mother recount from time to time how my father was sometimes abusive to her. I learned a lesson from that.
Absolutely.
You don't hit a woman.
Right. Yeah, my mom used to tell me things when I was very young. I mean, like between like 8 and 12, but she used to tell me certain things about her life that she had learned. And, even now when I share some of the stories and I tell people how old I was when she was telling me these, they're like, oh, she should have been telling you that at that age. And I'm like, well, but I mean, I learned. Like, I didn't make those same mistakes, and I'm never going to, because I mean, much like you, one of the things that I learned was I don't consider myself to have, I'm a pretty passive person, and people can say a lot of things to me, and even do somewhat a lot of things to me, and I have the ability to overlook it or forgive easily. But I have been in many relationships where if anybody were to ever hit me, that would be the only thing I could not handle in a relationship. And I'm lucky to have never had to deal with that situation, because I completely also understand the aspect of sometimes when you're in a relationship like that, it can be extremely hard to get out of it. But I can't imagine allowing someone to hit me and even forgiving them, honestly. Like, might not be the best thing to say, but that's my bar. That's my line. And once crossed, I can't have any respect for you anymore. I can't even look at you, barely. If you hit people and you're so angry within yourself, then you need to go be by yourself and figure out what is causing you to be so angry. And I can't help, and that's not something I can help you with.
That's correct. Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And so this is why it's so important to be open and frank. I mean, you just don't talk for the sake of talking. Because even when I share with students, my whole aim is whatever story I'm going to share with you, whatever real life antidote that I believe that you can benefit from, there's a lesson. I just don't share stories for the sake of sharing it, but I share it with the point that there's a lesson here. There's a lesson here that I feel as if that you can learn from thereabouts and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's fantastic. That I think one of your biggest lessons that you're sharing is kind of how to be, a better father, in even just learning from the mistake of your father, or any father that you've had in your life, kind of not being present. You've learned from that even to be present and be a father and be there for all the things, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And so you have to be involved. And being involved, you have to be there. You have to sit down with your children, and particularly boys. You get more or less, some boys, my son, he's on the quiet side too. And so you get to pry information out of him, because he's going to freely volunteer thereabout on that regards. And one of the things that also taught me to, it's really amazing how sometimes a bad choice or bad decision that you would have made in your youth, how it could follow you for the rest of your life. Thereabouts. And talking about, I lost my sight at the age of 21, and it's been more than close to 25 years now, and I'm still blind. And I remember one time when my son was 7 years of age, he asked me, Daddy, why did you do that stupid thing? And when he said that, I'm like, what stupid thing you talking about now? And so I asked him, what do you mean by that? He said, why did you attempt to rob the armored car vehicle? And, when he asked me that question, and I totally agree. I said, Lowell, what you said is absolutely correct. It was a stupid thing. And even in talking with him, it helped me to realize, also to understand, that decision is also had a negative effect on him, because I will never be able to take him out and play basketball with him.
Yeah.
Or play baseball. I will never be able to teach him how my mother taught me how to drive when I was in grade 8. And so there's a lot of things I will not be able to do with him that other fathers are able to do with their sons in that regard. And so it led me into conversation with him, helping them to see exactly, I totally agree on what you said. It was actually stupid in that regard. And so it helped me to also deepen further with him, help them to appreciate that sometimes the choices and decisions that we make, it can have a lasting effect on our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But that's something that you are able to teach him, is that, sometimes when you make decisions or make mistakes when you're young, it can, just like you said, have a lasting effect. You're exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I am super glad that you are still able to be there for your kids. You are exactly right. Also, that was a miracle that you are even here. Not many people get shot in the head and are able to survive at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah, because actually, the night I lost my sight, to be honest with you, I really wanted to die. And to be fact, I thought that I was going to die because I was never into church. I used to only go to church because my mother used to insist you must go to church. And so I hung around the church long enough to know that if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. And so I was living by the sword. I was living by the gun. And so I always knew that I was going to get gunned down. And, I thought I was smart. And I thought my biggest thing was that when I'm on the ground, several bullet wounds about my body, I just wouldn't have enough breath left in me to ask the good Lord for forgiveness and slip quietly into heaven. I wasn't living the life of a Christian, but sure, I wanted the end benefit of one in that regard. And so when I didn't die on that particular night, it was rough. And for many years, I used to look on that particular date as the worst day of my life. But as time began to go, I began to realize that was the best day of my life because in not losing my life, God gave me a second chance. And this second chance to be able to help other young people in that regards to walk away from that lifestyle, because when you don't have no strong male figure in your life, it's easy to walk on a path whereby a drug dealer now takes you under their wings and nurture you, or some gang leader takes you under their wings and nurture you, and these individuals become your idol, they become your role model, and eventually you find yourself living that particular lifestyle and so forth. And that particular lifestyle, I mean, it may seem to be glorious in the beginning, but it's a very short lifestyle.
Yeah. So is that how you got into it? I mean, did someone, basically, was there a male figure that paid attention to you and probably was impressed by you to some degree and was like, hey, come over here and I'll show you how this is done and we can work together? And, he was obviously trying to build out his community further even and other things, obviously, but is that how you got into it?
More or less, it was how I got into it. I used to play basketball in a particular area, and the guy said to me, man, like, if you carry on this bad and you're by yourself, you need to come join us. And so I heard about them, and I went and joined them, and one thing led to another. I joined at age 16, and by the age of 19, I was one of the leaders within the gang thereabouts and so forth. And so that was more or less how it happened. Like you said, someone recognize, okay, if he's carrying on this bad by himself, we need to bring him over here. And so, could you imagine if that was in sports,
right?
Something that is positive and constructive,
productive, yeah, exactly.
Because even in my book, I talk about the leader of the rebellion. He said it was only through fighting with different areas, because other close communities, did they actually get to know each other. And I said to myself, that same thing where each individual getting to know different places in the community, that could have been done through sports.
Yeah.
And I believe it was LeBron James who said it best. He said that sports was his way out from a life of drugs, from prison, and a life of crime.
Yeah.
And so, because at the end of the day, I mean, gang violence to a lot of young men, to them it's a sport, and they feel as if that whenever they want to, they can get up and leave. But you don't oftentimes when they do leave, they often leave in a body bag, or it's not until they're hit with 20 years in prison or 60 years in prison do they actually realize, no, I really made a mess of my life.
Yeah. So when you went into the gang and became a part of it, did you know what you were doing? Like, did you understand at that time that you were going to be doing questionable things?
Yeah, I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but it was fun.
Yeah.
And the gang itself has a law that is extremely strong. See, understand this. Like I shared with the parents on yesterday. Not every young man who grows up without a father tend to gravitate towards the gang. So that is not true, or to a life of violence. regardless who you are, we all have some emotional needs. We all have some emotional hunger. Some of us find fulfilling these emotional hunger in multiple relationships. What they call guys who are players and so forth, go from one woman to the other. Thereabouts. Some of us find trying to fill this void with materialistic things, the name brand clothing, the Tommy Hilfigers of this world, or the latest gadgets and so forth. And some try to fill that this emotional hunger with power, prestige, a sense of feeling important in that regard. In interviewing an individual who's the founding member of the gang and the leader of the gang, he goes by the street name Scrooge, and I dub him to be the godfather of street gangs in the Bahamas simply because he took 13 seemingly unpretentious young men and grew them into thousands. In my interview with him, he said to me, one of the things I often used to say, being a part of a gang is like being a broke millionaire. And that I mean, you can do anything you want. You can have anything you want. And you can get more women than you can ever want. It's like another world you can't see and you can't even imagine. And so this whole gang lifestyle, it's once you get into it, it's addictive.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a drug unto itself because you're doing violent things, and then there's a lot of females, young, uninformed females, and truth be told, some females just like that bad boy image.
Right.
And so you're doing foolishness, and you're making money, and then you get girls, falling all over you. Mm-hmm. Wanting to get next to you because they know if they are with you, then the respect that you have will also gravitate towards them. People, when they're walking on the streets, people will respect them because of because they're taking you.
Yeah. Well, and speaking from personal experience, I know too that a lot of women seek out protection from the people that they're with. Especially gang members, can sometimes provide that for them. And if that's something that you value highly, that's definitely, you can get wrapped up in it too.
It's correct.
So do you have, I know that you mentioned that you were working on another book. Do you have a timeline for that or an ability that if anybody wants to check back in with you or anything that any place they can do that?
Yes, I'm working on the process of having my second book edited. I'm trying to pull together the necessary funding that is needed to complete it thereabouts and so forth. The second book, the first book mainly focused on the absentee of fathers. The second book is entitled A Mother's Plea because on the night I lost my sight, I often talk about the stupidness that I did and I carry my scars on the outside, but my mother, she carries hers on the inside because on that particular night I lost my sight. My mother pleaded me several times, basically not to go. She didn't know what I was up to, but she knew I was up to no good thereabouts, and she pleaded me several times not to go out. And even on that particular day, when I was at work, my boss gave me an errand to run, and when I got in the vehicle, normally when I get in the vehicle, I would always change the station to a hip-hop station. And this time I didn't change the station because I was more concentrating on what I was going to be doing that evening. And the news came on, and the news was about two young men were shot by police officers in an attempted robbery, and one of the young men died. And my heart started to beat because I knew what I was about to do that very same evening. And I said to myself, oh, this is not going to happen to me. Got home, my mother's pleading for me not to go out. And I looked my mother in the eyes and said, I can be back in half an hour to 45 minutes. 45 minutes later, I was lying on the ground after being shot 4 times. And that same young man that the news broadcast I heard earlier that day, we would meet up in Fox Hill Prison in the medical facility in that regard. And so the second book is mainly on how equipping mothers, basically on how they can better tap into that mother's intuition, how they can trust it, lean on it, and particularly in being able to guide and direct their children and so forth.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. So had your mother ever tried to stop you before?
Yeah. She when I first started doing foolishness, particularly because the first set of crimes I got involved in was shop break-ins. And if I was and there were times I bought a brand new phone home, man, she basically kicked me out the house in that regard. And so she was firm. And then after a while, she started going through a hard time. and I started running across the money, and when she started accepting the money, basically, and then the other stuff started to come in as well, basically, and then it got to a point whereby she never knew what I was doing, and it became a concern for her. She never could sleep well because she knew I was out there probably doing something that's illegal, and it got to a point where she just, threw her hand up and said, "Like, yeah, this is just too much." Because she told me on the night I left, and she tried to stop me from going out, and she went to the back porch and she raised her hand up to heaven and said, "God, when is this boy going to stop? Is it going to be when he's dead? And if that's the case, then he's better off dead."
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Mm.
All right. So do you have a name for your second book?
Yeah, it's entitled A Mother's Plea.
A Mother's Plea. Okay, perfect. And the first one is The Fight of My Life is Wrapped Up in My Father. They're both wonderful books. They both, I'm assuming that your second one's going to be just as wonderful as your first, but I also really appreciated that yours has, it has a lot of research backing up exactly what you're saying.
That's correct.
Yeah, so it's fantastic and definitely a good read. I highly recommend.
Truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I loved having this conversation, and I hope that we get to have more in the future.
Well, the pleasure was all mine.